Elizabeth Gildersleeve. I head up communications and public affairs here at the college, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this afternoon's panel on Wellesley Thought Leadership and the Op-Ed Project. As the premier college for women and a global center for women's leadership, Wellesley is committed to increasing women's voices in thought leadership and the media, and we are fortunate that our faculty are playing an active role in that effort. We invited the Op-Ed Project to campus this past June to give a workshop to about 20 faculty members. Faculty members from a range of background, including psychology and economics and English literature and chemistry. Political science will be here soon, the empty chair right there, and many more backgrounds. And I am so happy to tell you that since then, in 4 short months, we have published 10 op-eds, 10 op-eds in 4 months. We have several of those faculty members here to join the conversation today. And I am particularly thrilled and honored to introduce our moderator, Geneva Overholser, Wellesley class of 1970. Geneva is a journalist and leader in advancing the voices and perspectives of women in the media and beyond. She served as professor and director of USC's Annenberg School for Journalism, and editor of the Des Moines Register, where she led the paper to a Pulitzer Prize for public service. She's been ombudsman for the Washington Post, a member of the editorial board of the New York Times, and a board member of Women's Media Center. Geneva, thank you for all the work that you have done to bridge division, to deepen our civic dialogue, and to change the conversation. We are delighted to welcome you back to Wellesley College.
Thank you. And it was really a delight to be able to talk about Wellesley together. I'm so honored to be here on the stage with these 5, and I love that this topic is part of our weekend. Nothing is more important to me than to think about how we can enrich the public dialogue. One reason I have such a sense of urgency is figures like these that came to us from the Op-Ed Project. 80 to 90% of contributors to key opinion features are men. 84% of TV pundits on Sunday morning talk shows are men. 87% of Wikipedia contributors are men. 85% of Hollywood producers, 83% of Congress. The fact is that generally, white, privileged, and overwhelmingly male people are the people who shape our civic dialogue. And the organizations and institutions that I've cited here are fundamentally, I've worked for a number of them, as Elizabeth pointed out, pretty status quo institutions, and now with many of them under economic pressure, they're even more change averse than they have been. So when the contributions to the debate are as lopsided as they are, our public policies suffer as a consequence. When I was at Wellesley in the late 60s, as some of you in the room were, we eager young feminists were part of a revolution that we hoped would create for us equal opportunities at work and shared responsibilities at home. And I think we kind of got stuck halfway through that revolution. We got the work, but not the balance. And I think that's partly because women have not been as large a part of the debate as they very much need to be. We are in a position at Wellesley to make a big difference in that imbalance, and so it's wonderful, I think, that we have gathered here today to talk about ways to do that. We're going to focus on op-ed pieces, which are, of course, an important part of the agenda-setting role of the media, particularly when academics such as my colleagues here share their knowledge and research. But there are many ways for all of us to make ourselves heard today. Indeed, I want the students here to think about the fact that every contribution you make to social media, whether you're making a Facebook post or a tweet, is a part of the civic dialogue, for good or for ill, and is a contribution to the public debate in this country. As you will see in our discussion today, the choices you make can make a big difference. So I'm going to begin by asking each of our panelists briefly to introduce herself or himself. Tell us what is your field or your expertise, what your recent op-ed piece was about, and why you wrote on the topic. We'll begin at the far end with Angela Bahns.
Thanks. My name's Angela Bahns. I'm a faculty member in the psychology department. I'm a social psychologist, and my research expertise is on prejudice and stereotyping. And my op-ed is about how prejudice can cause perception of threat. This was published just a couple of days after the anniversary of the death of Michael Brown. And I wrote it sort of in response to the police shootings because I felt that the work that I'm doing on threat as justification of prejudice had something new to contribute to the conversation on race that I wasn't seeing already out there. And I saw a problem with a lot of the dialogue that is going on, in that there's so much focus on the victims in these cases in terms of what were they doing at the time, what did they look like, what were they wearing, you know, trying to get at whether or not they may have provoked the officers in some way. And I felt like not enough examination of the police officers and with an understanding of how their perception of the men that they confronted may have been influenced by racial prejudice. So I feel that the problem is there's an assumption that it's something about them that makes them threatening, them being black men in this case, rather than it's something about us that makes us see them that way. And my research sheds light on this problem by showing that threat perception is subjective, right? Threat can be constructed post hoc as an explanation or justification for prejudice. And I felt like this perspective was somewhat new, and I wanted it to be out there and in the conversation.
Thank you. And Roxanne Euben?
My name is Roxanne Euben. I'm in the Department of Political Science. I'm a political theorist, and my research in general is on Western and Islamic political thought. I'm currently working on a book on Arab and Islamic conceptions of humiliation, and my op-ed topic actually draws from one of my chapters and was written on the occasion of the one-year anniversary of the posting of the videos of the beheading of James Foley and Stephen Sotloff. A disturbing topic, I know. I wrote it because I was frustrated with the dominant ways of understanding why these videos were made. There was a sort of parade of terrorism and security experts who tend to apply certain kinds of terrorism and security logic, usually a strategic logic that understands these kinds of propaganda videos in terms of simply a tactic, a means to an end. And in terms of my research, it seems to me that it was important to understand the performative, the theatrical meanings of violence that were evident in what I call the visual rhetoric of these videos. So what I did in the op-ed piece was to sort of closely analyze the performative aspects of this violence and understand it in terms of retaliatory humiliation. And I argue that once it's understood in these terms, it gives us a much deeper understanding of why these videos resonated so deeply among certain audiences, certain male audiences in particular, and why it functions so powerfully as a recruiting device, not only for fighters, but for what I call armchair Islamists, those who actually formed a kind of digital army to disseminate Islamic State propaganda. So that was my op-ed.
Hi, so I'm Phil Levine. I'm in the economics department. Actually, so my research is mostly about social policy, but my op-ed pieces have not really been directly related to my research itself, as opposed to actually college service. So as one of my activities at the college, I have been spending some time thinking about our financial aid system and realizing how unusual it is, in the sense that, not that Wellesley's is unusual, it turns out that all financial aid systems are unusual, in the sense that essentially people have no idea how much college actually costs if they're eligible for financial aid until April of their senior year, when they get their award letter after they've been admitted to the college. You can imagine that's something of an unusual system. People generally make decisions about whether to purchase products by knowing what the price is in advance of when they have to buy it, as opposed to after when they need to buy it. And that it might make sense to tell people earlier in the process what college would cost. That led me to develop my intuition, which some of you may have heard about already, but it's a very simplified calculator that takes about 3 minutes for people to use. You put in 6 basic financial characteristics. You get an estimate of what Wellesley College would cost you, and it's been very successful so far here at Wellesley in the 2 years that it's been implemented. I've been writing op-eds trying to promote that logic, not only because I think it makes more sense for Wellesley College, because it makes more sense for the world, really. And in reality, what I want to see happen is for this to be expanded to a much broader set of schools than just currently Williams and UVA have also added my intuition this year. That's just not enough, and so I've been writing op-eds trying to expand the use of the tool.
Hi, I'm Kathryn Lynch. My current position at the college is Dean of Faculty Affairs, but before I went into the Dean's office 5 years ago, I spent 27 years teaching in the English department, where my special field is medieval English literature, and particularly the poetry of Geoffrey Chaucer. And that's not directly the topic of my op-ed, but I am very discouraged by the dramatically falling enrollments in the humanities over the last several years, particularly since the financial crisis in 2008. So I was looking for an opportunity to defend the humanities, not only because they provide some of the best training for careers, which I believe that they do, but also because the material that we study, even someone like me who studies the century between 1300 and 1400, are so important to our culture as human beings, imagining a world where we wouldn't have anymore the poetry of Geoffrey Chaucer, who is my main research area, or of Shakespeare, or of Guillaume de Machaut, or John Gower, or any of the other great poets of the 14th century, really makes me feel worried for our culture. So we were taught in the op-ed project that we needed to have a hook. And the general crisis in the humanities wasn't enough of a hook, so I hooked myself onto the political developments in the state of Wisconsin, where the legislature was trying to change the regulations regarding tenure in order to reduce or eliminate some of the humanities departments. And my op-ed was published on June 19th in the Washington Post. And I argued for retaining the departments that are currently under siege, a lot of them in the foreign languages and also literature departments.
Great. Adele?
So good afternoon. I'm Adele Wolfson. I'm a member of the chemistry department, although at the moment I'm serving as interim dean of students. My scientific expertise is actually in biochemistry. I'm a steroid biochemist, but I also do a lot of work on science education, and that is what the topic of my op-ed piece was. I was driven to write this piece almost before the op-ed project, but I was thinking of it in much more confined terms than getting it out to a larger audience, because I was so annoyed at the way that science was being described as being really just a collection of facts, and not as a worldview and an understanding of how systems work. And so I used the hook of talking about medical education, because that's been very much in the news, the requirements for students going to medical school and students in medical school, that the amount of science that they're doing is really being reduced, maybe not so much in terms of volume, but in terms of deep understanding in favor of some other fields. But what it allowed me to do was actually to hook on to some of what Cappy is saying and talk about my really deeply held beliefs that science is one of the liberal arts and that everybody needs to know both the liberal arts and know the humanities and the social sciences as well as the sciences, and that in fact our science students are among the most broadly educated of the students that we produce.
So each of you has written on really important and timely topics. Would you have written the op-ed had you not done the op-ed project? And those of you who are inclined to respond to the question, tell us a little about what the op-ed project training involved. Anybody?
This is a bit of embarrassing, but I had tried to write some op-eds a few times. I actually published. A lot of company in that. Yeah, I published an op-ed. I don't know if you call it an op-ed in about a decade ago in the Chronicle of Higher Education on why I thought it was a good idea for women who want to have families to start their families in graduate school. But in between then and June of last year, I had written a few op-eds, and I had sent them into the black hole of the submission page. And so I'd kind of given up on doing it. Because even when you write an op-ed that doesn't get published, it takes a lot of time to do it. And it's frustrating, and like most people probably, I don't enjoy being rejected. So ignored, yeah, no, I mean, they basically say in the submission guidelines that if you don't hear in 48 hours or something, assume that you're rejected, which is, pretty discouraging. So I think that being in the op-ed project gave me the courage and some of the skills. I learned things like you don't attach your op-ed to the email submission, which I didn't know. If you attach it as an attachment, they just won't read it because they don't have enough time to open an attachment, apparently. They can only scroll down. So I learned that, you have to put it in an email. But I also, I have to say, it wasn't just the op-ed project, it was our amazing public affairs office, who, after I was in the op-ed project, said, don't you think you want to try to write that up as an op-ed? And for my colleagues, so I did it, and then they pitched it. So if it hadn't been for our public affairs office, I don't think I would have had the courage to do it, but I would not have. I would not have had the skills to get it accepted, and I wouldn't have had the confidence to try again after rejection.
But now you have tried again.
And I'm waiting to be rejected. I have tried again, and I have an op-ed submission that's out there in the black hole as we speak, trying to find its way.
Do others of you have equally embarrassing things to admit, or would you, Phil, you've done op-eds previously?
So I had actually done op-eds before the op-ed project and had been successful in doing that, but I think for me, the benefit of the project was it helped me refine my skills. And, I'll be honest, a lot of times in the past when I had been successful, clearly the person who clicked on my thing, and I don't know how that worked, but, they clicked on the thing and liked the idea enough essentially to coach me through what they wanted me to say or how they wanted me to say it. And, I think that having been to the op-ed project, I have a better sense of, how to start in the first place, and that's certainly got to increase your chances than in making them work at the other end. So I definitely think the concept. Now every time I read an op-ed, I'm looking for where's the to be sure.
Exactly, the to be sure, to show that you have considered all sides. We are going to get to questions. Yes, can we talk a little more about what the op-ed project entailed? Let me say one funny thing that I know about. It's a wonderful project, and I remember talking to somebody early on who did one of these and said that she's told the assembled group, you need to talk about something you know about. You need to write about something you know. And the women in the group all said, well, I'm not really an expert on anything. And the woman said that she had never heard a man say he was not an expert on anything. But the point being that that is one of the pieces of advice. Speak to an issue you know. Obviously, you all have a great deal of expertise. What else happened in the op-ed project?
Well, just responding to what you just said, they really taught us to state our expertise. So to start every statement or every email to an editor with the words, this is who I am, this is my expertise because, and explain where we got that from. And I would say for me, that was probably the best part of the whole project, because the idea that I would have something to say to the outside world, I know I have something to say within the confines of my classroom or my professional organization, but to think that I have it to say to the broader world was really an important piece.
So the op-ed project is a nonprofit based in New York whose goal is to enrich the sources of information coming to us through various channels. And both from women and people of color and from younger people. And among its projects has been to join forces with several different academic institutions. And Wellesley and the op-ed project joined forces several months ago.
Early June.
Early June, okay. Anybody else want to talk about whether you would have written it or not?
I'll say something about that. I would say that as a junior faculty member with so many constraints and pressures on time, not that senior faculty members don't also have similar pressures, but I definitely wouldn't have done it. I happened to be on sabbatical and felt like that gave me the invitation to do something that I felt like was important, but I wasn't sure if it would necessarily be valued by the systems of promotion and tenure. Because being a non-academic publication. So I did it really because I felt like the academic research I was doing was important and mattered in the world and had this connection to this pressing current issue, and I wanted to get my message beyond the confines of academia, but I really don't think I would have done it if it hadn't been the right moment, if I hadn't have had the training through the op-ed project, if I hadn't have been on leave, sort of all of these things aligned.
So I want to come back to this question of whether the system will value it, which I think is a very valid one. But if you don't mind my sticking with you, Angela, I want to move on to, did you feel that publishing it had the effect you hoped, and what effect has it had? And I want to start with you because you're going to be speaking with one of the nation's preeminent African-American columnists because of your piece.
I am, and largely through the persistence of Sophia in our public affairs office. I'm going to be speaking with Leonard Pitts next week, who has, taken an interest in my research. And so, as a personal outcome, it has been encouraging to get some sort of more recognition of my research. But, really why I did it was just to get the argument out there into public dialogue. And so in that respect, I feel like I was successful. I don't have a great sense of how it was received, sort of on a broad scale, because I published in the National Journal, and they happened to not have a comment page, which, maybe is for the best. I did find my op-ed pop up in some blogs. Some people commented on it, and certainly there were some defensive reactions out there. But I don't take that to mean that, that my message was a failure. I think that if anything, it's stimulating dialogue and conversation, and there are going to be some defensive reactions, so.
Probably the absence of commentary on National Journal spared you some misogynist, vile response.
For sure.
What about, Roxanne, what about you? Did you feel that it had the impact you hoped for?
I think it's very hard to know. I'm always very happy when I, don't see a long line of trolls weighing in and, saying I know where you live and stuff like that. I think what's always interesting, given the subject on which I write, is the sort of odd places where it begins to register. It takes time I think one of the first places it registered is among a lot of my former Wellesley students who are in the academic world, who are very sweet on Facebook. But the second places where it kind of was immediately picked up are kind of the defense and security sort of online magazines who pay very close attention, and then from some international magazines, like a Kurdish magazine, just wanted to interview me because of it. So I don't know how to predict it, and I don't have expectations that it's going to change a conversation, and it's very hard to measure impact, especially given the proliferation of sites and information. There aren't the gatekeepers that there used to be. There are multiple sites. It's very hard to gauge.
And it would be a mistake to think that you'd know by now what the effect is going to be. You're right at the beginnings of it. Anybody else on impact? Kathy?
I had over 350 comments on mine, and I made the mistake of reading them because, I don't publish an op-ed every day, and it was really kind of fascinating to read the comments. A lot of them were negative, but not all of them. I think even more, like Roxanne, I don't have any illusions that I've changed the conversation, though I'm really glad that my perspective is out there. But I received emails from all over the world, and that was wonderful. The couple of weeks after I published it, I heard from scholars in Japan, from a dean at the University of Manchester, from the president of one of our peer colleges, from former students, from people that I didn't know who were faculty members at other schools who shared my perspective. And it was really, and I was elated to be in a dialogue like that, and I made a point of responding to every comment, every email, not the 350 comments. I made a point of responding personally and separately to all the emails I got, and that was just really wonderful. I will always treasure the experience of having been published in such a prominent venue, so that I could really get the sense that what I had written had been read by a lot of people. As a medievalist writing about Chaucer, I don't usually have a very large audience.
So talk to me about, and to us, about being an academic who becomes a commentator. Did it feel natural? Does it feel that it complements your research, your teaching? These could be two very different roles, right? Well, why don't you begin? Because as a scientist, it may be even more.
That's true. I would say that it complements teaching exactly. I mean, it's just teaching to a larger audience. And in that sense, it felt very comfortable. Just if we can go back to the previous question a little bit, I would say that the happiest circumstance of my publishing this piece was the dialogue that it allowed on campus. So the fact that science and the humanities could be in dialogue with one another over this piece was really nice, and I think it gave me validity as somebody to speak about this from the viewpoint of the sciences in a way.
In faculty meetings or in the news?
Well, again, our wonderful public affairs people put it on our daily shot, and therefore it got spread to the community, which was really important.
So it worked for teaching, or do I infer correctly that maybe less so for research?
I think it depends on what people's research is. I mean, I think that everyone else who's spoken, maybe not Cappy, but everyone else is working on an area which is of general interest to the public in a way that science is not always, but sometimes it does rise to the fore, right?
Should be. Yeah. We make a lot of bad public policy because it isn't.
That's
right?
why I'm worried that people don't take enough science.
Yeah. And that scientists don't write enough op-eds.
There you go.
Well, what about the rest of you? Does it complement your work as an academic?
The teaching comment it's the same thing. It is totally just a different audience. But, for me, I think it's been complementary in a different way, in the sense that, I'm actually trying to advocate for something in a way that as an academic I would never do. I want a specific thing to change. I want other schools to adopt this calculator. And, as an academic, think things on the basis of my research, and I try to communicate, well, it seems like this is correct. But then it sort of stops there, right, without saying, and we should do this. And so for me, I found it to be sort of, a nice next step, sort of an additional item that I can bring to the table to be able to, forcefully advocate for a point that I would never be willing to do in an academic setting.
Mm-hmm. It's also very good for Wellesley.
I hope so.
Yeah. More on impact, either from Cappy or Roxanne? And your academic, on your own work as an academic?
I find it, and this also goes to maybe one of the other questions we were asked to think about. It's difficult for me to translate my research into an op-ed for the same reason it's sometimes difficult to translate my research into teaching. It involves some of the same skills, that it's a challenge to find the right illustration, the right example, the right words to translate what can sometimes be highly theoretical or conceptual into the right illustration that can demonstrate the stakes, the political stakes, and the urgency of them, because I'm a political theorist, but I'm really animated by the political end, not the theoretical end. The theory follows the politics. So I'm really animated by the political questions behind my work. But the language, like any field, when you're operating at a certain level of research, there are always some, technical jargon, right? Every field has that when you're doing research, and so it's there can always be a challenge to translating it, to making it more accessible, to being able to make it accessible to intelligent people that you just want to be able to communicate. Why is this important? What are the political stakes at work? Why is this urgent? And why should I read this? And that can be a challenge with my work. It really takes a lot of effort. And so it took a lot of effort with this op-ed piece. I don't know how quickly I'll do another one. It takes similar skills as teaching, but it doesn't easily happen all the time.
I also find it difficult to take the training that I've gotten to do scholarly writing and to try to translate it into this very different genre where you have maybe 800 words and you're really not supposed to have a lot of qualifiers and caveats and footnotes and all those things that we learn as scholars. Our work will not be taken seriously if we haven't shown that we've looked at every side of it, if we don't have a lot of history in it, a lot of background, and it's the exact opposite. So it's very dislocating to, I think of myself as a really good writer of scholarly prose, but that doesn't translate easily into being a really good op-ed writer. It's a very different thing. One of the things, we had a day and a half of workshop to kind of go back to what the op-ed project is. And then for a year afterwards, we have access to an op-ed mentor. If we write an op-ed and then we can send our op-ed to a professional journalist who is very experienced in op-eds who will read and critique it. And I didn't do that with the piece that I published in June, but I did it just last week. And it had been a while since I'd been in the op-ed project, and I had forgotten some of the rules. And my mentor was really helpful. She wrote me this big long email, and basically the message was, you take too long to get to the point. You have too much history in here. You don't need so much detail. You need to move the colorful example from the end of your piece back up to the beginning of the piece. And it's really instructive and very helpful and needed if you want to translate your thinking for a broader audience.
It's true even for students. When I left undergraduate school and got my master's at Northwestern in journalism, Dick Schwartzlow said to me, "God damn it, Overholser, it's going to take us months to whip those $5 Wellesley words out of you." I think it did, too. Well, so do you think Wellesley, maybe the wonderful public relations people are very much aware of how great this is for Wellesley, but will the tenure committee be well aware of how good it is for Wellesley, Angela? And you know, I mean, seriously, I think all people in various fields in academics have really struggled with how much is it my responsibility to communicate to the general public? And I think scientists are struggling with it. I've been part of several projects on this question. How much of my time should I be devoting to this as an academic? It's a tough question. But specifically, is Wellesley likely to value this? Do you trust that it will, Angela? The tenure committee?
I don't know that I necessarily want to answer that or know the answer to that. I think that it would be seen as, our portfolios are seen as a whole, as one piece of it. Certainly, it's not going to substitute for excellent scholarship in academic outlets, but if anything, it could be sort of a way to stand out a little bit or enrich an otherwise strong profile. That's sort of my understanding.
It's time taking to teach, it's time taking to research, and it's time taking to do op-eds.
Absolutely, and there just aren't enough hours in the day. And to be honest, I'm not sure that I'm going to be writing another op-ed again before I get tenure. Just because, it took me several weeks devoted to this piece and revising it and back and forth, and, I just normally can't afford to take that focus away from the other things that I'm doing.
And that's with the good research of the staff.
Absolutely.
What about the rest of you on that question? Do you think the college will value it? You're a good, I'm sure. We should ask the dean.
I've been on the college's Committee on Faculty Appointments for basically the last 9 years, because now as a dean and before as a faculty member. And this question came up while we were in the project, and there were some people who thought it would be harmful to them if they published op-eds. And I was able to say very unequivocally that that was not true. It would certainly be a plus. But I think Angela has it exactly right that, it's probably not going to substitute for creation of original knowledge in the field, and so everybody has to make their own decision about how they invest their time, and I think you're exactly right. It will make you stand out, but it's not going to be instead of. So it's just one more thing to think that you have to do. And yet I do agree with you. I think it is Phil's, my intuition, has been extraordinarily beneficial to Wellesley College. I think that it's really put us on the map in a certain area that matters very much to people outside of our walls.
I was going to say, I think when this did come up, I think what some folks had in mind was the fact that the tenure process also involves outside letters, and that faculty at other institutions have other views of whether or not devoting time to that kind of work detracts from the seriousness of one's research portfolio. So while I think the CFA's view is ultimately dispositive, because they make they sort through the judgments of the outside reviewers that they think are most important. I think there's a fair amount of variation on what other scholars think when they write these kinds of letters.
No question.
I was just going to say that I think this is a moment to consider what scholarship means, and not just in the context of the op-ed project, but all kinds of uses of citations, for example. I've actually published a piece on the use of altmetrics, which means not just looking at citations in scholarly journals, but also blogs and websites and other kinds of venues, and we have no mechanism really to think about that in terms of tenure and promotion. So I think this is a time to be thinking about all of these things. And the positive part is that I do remember when I was a junior faculty member thinking about writing a popular piece, the dean at the time told me that it would be a negative and I should not do it. So at least you're not hearing that from the dean at this moment.
I believe that's right. We're in a period of real flux, and it strikes me that if Wellesley could genuinely build on this notion of encouraging faculty members to do this, but really supporting them which does take away part of the pain of it. If they're shopping them around and you're not, they share the rejection with you, and then I think that could make a big difference. So I hope Wellesley will really pursue this. I want to pick up on one of your points, and that is, what about blogs, and what about HuffPo, the Huffington Post, or Medium? I would argue that there are opportunities to be heard in the less vaunted legacy media, sometimes more readily because things can go viral so readily. Of course, the Post can go viral too, but do you feel like you are being urged to publish in more sort of highly esteemed publications, or do you feel like you prefer to publish in those? Because I have found now that I would far rather post whatever my latest posting is on my own website than do social media and get a whole lot of response, than turn myself over to somebody who does a job I used to do of ignoring a lot of op-ed submissions. So did you decide where you wanted to post what your first choice would be, at least, about where you wanted your pieces to run? Any of you?
I would say that academics tend to be a little bit stodgy in terms of the use of new media. No. And our ability, willingness, desire, whatever, to join the new age maybe a little bit lacking, and we definitely could use more prompts in that direction.
But you were glad to get emails.
Off of my vax.
You would definitely rather be in the Washington Post than in the Huffington Post. All of you? And Medium or Vox, or you clearly would go for legacy. Well, I would think that's a job for the staff here to help you branch out too.
She's been yelling at me about this all the time. But Vox works.
What's that?
Vox works.
Yeah. So you've been sharing with me answers to the questions I have. I'd be eager for you to jump in with anything that's on your mind, and we're going to go to the audience in a few minutes, but let's talk a little bit about the details of working with people. You mentioned, Phil, I think that, or one of you mentioned that somebody really helped you through it. I think a good publication often has a good editor who will really work with a person and write a good headline and make you feel good about it generally. And working with some publishers won't bring the same results. So that makes a difference. Did you all have good experiences? Did they vary wildly among you, or?
I definitely have had that experience where I sent something and the editor clearly liked what I wrote in content, but not in style, and essentially helped me rewrite the whole thing. Mm-hmm. To the point where at the end it's like, yeah, that's definitely better. It's like, that's why you're doing your job and I'm doing my job.
Right, right. I don't know what you know, and you don't write the way I write.
I definitely,
and you were
more than one instance.
You were willing to do that, to go through all those.
I mean, I don't have a whole lot of pride in the exact word choice and order. I have pride in the idea. That's what I care about. I'm trying to convey an idea. And if they can convey that idea better than I can convey the idea, I'm happy with that.
When I wrote my piece for the Chronicle of Higher Education, which was a while ago, the editor, I think they wanted to have something about family planning for women graduate students, so they were eager to publish my piece, and it was in pretty rough shape, and they really did help me rewrite it. But one of the things that they did was they, as I said before, they made me take out all the caveats. So I had basically written this piece, have children in graduate school, but I wasn't writing it to everybody. I had all these things in it that said, of course, everyone does not have to have children. If you want to have children and you have the financial resources to, set a safety net, then graduate school might be a better time to do it than on the tenure track. Well, of course, all of that went onto the proverbial cutting room floor.
All those nuances.
That's
and reasonable.
Right. And then after it came out and there were responses, letters to the editor.
What if I don't want to have
That's
children?
exactly right, yeah. They were all like, well, this rabid feminist, thinks everyone should have children, and some people don't want to have children, and some people can't afford to do this, and so that was a little bit frustrating. But that's just, I think that's just how it goes, and it definitely was better and a lot shorter after I had the help of a
lot of
really
this
good
is
editor.
about what will people read and how many people do you want. I mean, I used to joke in my family, I come from a family of academics, and I used to think that it was clear that other people's writing was much stronger than mine because nobody read theirs and everybody read mine. I mean, it becomes almost, if everybody's going to read it, it can't really be worth that much. So it's hard. There's a real tension there.
I had a very patient editor who...
you are, or you had?
I had, for mine, a very patient editor who let me argue with her. And I remember we must have gone back 10, 12 times about the title. Because I was wedded to certain kinds of concepts, and I like them alliterative. And, she finally said, they are alliterative, but, you want people to read it. And it kind of really just came down to that. And I was struck by something else, and I know this is something that academics always wind up pulling out at one point or another. I worked on my high school newspaper for like 2.5 seconds. Therefore, I was a journalist. And I worked on a daily newspaper for a couple years. And I do remember, it was a small one in Western Massachusetts, and I remember it was wonderful. I had an editor, and it was fresh out of Wesleyan, right, a philosophy major. So I needed a lot of editing then, too. And I remember he would just rip apart everything. And I became, because I would do 1 or 2 stories a day, I became a phenomenally good writer for a newspaper. Evidently, I've completely and totally lost any capacity that I mean, it's like a muscle that entirely atrophies. And I have no capacity to do that. I've lost it entirely. It's like once being fluent in a language and having forgotten every single thing you ever learned. And it's kind of depressing, actually. I mean, but it also suggests that, once you do learn how to do an op-ed, you should repeat it. Even though I'm, of course, not doing that. Don't do what I do what I say. It suggests that once you learn how to do it, you should repeat it because it is like a muscle that you're learning to use. And you should do it over and over because it's a talent and you should reinforce it. And with every repetition, you get better and better.
I agree with that. So, Angela, in all honesty, I thought the headline put on your piece went too far down the road of you want people to read it. Did you? And I'm a journalist.
Yes, and that's really the only thing the editor changed was the headline. And the headline was, "My research says black men are not dangerous."
It was much less.
It betrays the research because the research isn't specifically about black men at all. It has this implication. But, so, yeah, it's not a true representation of the evidence behind the argument.
It's one thing to grab readers, it's another thing to do it without legitimately reflecting the piece. So, anything else on your mind before we turn to the audience? Points that we haven't made that you're burning to share with your colleagues? Are your colleagues drawn to do? It was a small group of you who did the project.
20?
20. So, are others drawn, do you think, to do it? Or have you had conversations with people about it among your colleagues?
I know other people who have written op-eds and are doing public writing. So yeah, I think that, I'm from an English department, so I suppose that's not surprising. But I think people are interested. You spend your whole life doing research in a field. To feel that you could share that with a broader audience and have an impact and make a difference, I think that's a very compelling and appealing prospect.
It's definitely a little limiting to, to write to the same 100 people that are your best friends, like, all the time.
I do think it depends a lot on the field, and I think that people who do research that they think will have implications for the wider world want that out as much as possible. Whereas if it feels like it is for the same 100 or even 1,000 people, they can be reached with the typical professional journals.
Right. Do you encourage your students to make contributions like this? there's a writing program here. I'd love to have that mentioned.
Yeah, we are piloting, I think we're about halfway through a 5-year seed grant from the Calderwood Foundation to pilot a series of capstone seminars in public writing. And so those are happening. They were actually started by one of Phil's colleagues in the economics department, David Lindauer, on economic journalism, but they've been one of Angela's colleagues is teaching one, and there's one being taught by someone from the French department, from biology, from English, from music. So they're kind of all over the place. Dan Chasen, who does a lot of public writing, is teaching one on reviewing. So I think we're really hopeful that these will take hold and that we'll be able to make them a permanent part of the curriculum.
So if I could harangue the students in the audience to really think about the contribution you can make to the public debate. I mean, the idea that we think we're not experts, we're each experts on our own lives, and our lives really need to be heard, and too many women's lives are not, and issues, therefore, don't reach the public and don't become public policy. So do any of you in the audience have questions for our panel? There are microphones, one here and one here. Callie. Oh, all my buddies. Yes, I love it. I know.
And amazingly, we're both journalists. How surprising that we should be here. So just a quick background. My name's Melissa Ludke, and my parents were also both academics. I came to this school. I majored in art history, which was mentioned earlier as a very popular major. And my first job after that was as a sports writer. So having to learn how to move from coming from an academic household through a Wellesley liberal arts education, studying art history, and then trying to write a story for Sports Illustrated magazine, I want to tell you that was a very different kind of writing. So I hear what all of you are saying, but I want to emphasize what Geneva's been saying too, and how important it is to try to bring your voices. It's not easy to cross that bridge. I know I once had a job working with people through the American Academy of Arts and Letters to try to get them to write op-eds on what they were doing with children's issues. It's difficult, but I would really encourage you and the people here at Wellesley to try, and I just want to bring one other forum for this into this conversation for all of you and others here. The conversation. Have people heard of The Conversation? Okay, you all would be beautifully situated for The Conversation. Here's what it is. It was started in Australia. It now exists in the United States. It's based at Boston University. Friends of Callie's and mine are the editor of it and work at it. They really depend, their only voices are academics, but they have editors who are trained as journalists to work with academics. In other words, what they want to do is preserve the academic voice, but they want to bring it out into the open. So from my perspective, what you're seeing is a middle ground bridge building operation there that has wide berth in terms of its landscape. Because I hear you, you don't spend your life on social media. So you can't do what Geneva does. You can't just sit down and write and then rely on your brand of social media to get your stuff out. So I wanted to bring the conversation into your heads and your head and try to see if that's a way to try to draw out this Wellesley experience, because let's get voices out there and your ideas, because they're powerful. And anyway, so
That's
it's
great.
less of a question, but I really felt compelled to get that in there.
I feel like Sophia and Elizabeth ought to stand up. They're nodding, so obviously they know about it. What do you do? I've never heard of The Conversation either.
You should all just look to it and subscribe to it, because each morning I get a memo sent to me from The Conversation that lays out, there's an editor's note at the top, and afterwards they lay out by category, and they have various beats on it that they have editors assigned to. And I know these editors. They work really hard to retain the academic voice. This is not someone at the Boston Globe who's trying to turn it into, you know, a very much of a conversation only for those who read their pages. It's meant to bridge this audience to start with.
But how widely disseminated?
It's very widely disseminated. They have their own social media. They're all over the world. They go through Australia, through the UK, through France, etc. They've just started in the United States. So it's really good, and colleges have the capacity to sign up with them and be resources where editors can turn to the college PR people and say, we're looking for someone in this zone. Can you help us? So go for it. That's what I would say. Go for it.
Thank you. Any thoughts?
That sounds like a great suggestion.
Yeah.
Yes, subscribe.
Thank you, Melissa. Callie.
Callie Crossley. So, a comment first. I write a commentary every week, so I feel your pain about cranking it out. I really do, and you know, that's what I do. But I just want to suggest like sort of a shorthand, a shortcut rather, for some of you. Almost every one of your issues is something that lives and that's been living in the world and continuing. Don't wait to write it. See, if you're writing it right now, then the thing hits, the hook hits, and then you're right in there. And then all you have to do is really change the top to be right where the moment is, because this is what happens. Every single man, no offense, that I know that's in the op-ed business is ready. And the moment something hits, that's why we see all the male bylines, certainly on the print and even on the online. They are dominant because they are waiting for their moment. They don't write after the moment. They already have it ready to go. And so I don't see that many women. Second thing is, back to somebody said earlier about how women say, oh, Geneva, you said, oh, I'm not an expert, so they make you bring out your expert, the women. I try very desperately to look to both online and offline for my longer conversations on radio to people who may have started a conversation in an op-ed. And it's really hard to get women academics, particularly, oh, well, that's not quite what I said. Yeah, that's what I said, but that was just for that one piece. But I'm like, please, you're killing me. Can you just come on and talk about this in a broad way? I mean, I really try. I'm trolling, looking for this, and it's tough. So I just want to say once again from the journalists that there are some of us who are looking for your voices, and you're not helping me if you start telling me that my only expertise is in this potted plant and this orange right here on the stage. Now, if you talk to me about potted plants in the hallway, I don't really know that. I don't do hallways, just what's on the stage. That's rough. So just timing, and please just be a little bit broader and more open because the broadcast stuff also helps. And people, I'm sorry, BuzzFeed is the way you want to go. I'm just really sorry for you. You got to get to BuzzFeed.
I wanted to say one quick, please do stay, but can I say one quick thing? I agree with so much of what you've said, as always, Callie, but I think the fact that you are looking for a diversity of voices does not connote just how much everybody else is, and it's still so true. I wrote after 9/11 a piece, a commentary for NPR about the fact that that week newspapers expanded their op-ed pages, and they still asked white men only to speak. And the debate was not what it should have been about our response, because there were so few people represented in those voices. So, and that still goes on. You were going to say something. Yes.
I was very, I don't know if this is working, but
yeah.
I noticed after 9/11 as well, I saw a parade of self-appointed experts, terrorism experts, military experts. The fact is that particularly when there are things involving weaponry and national security, there's a parade of men who are seen to be as experts on hard things. Right. I know the women who have done the research on the countries, who have done the field work, who should be up there talking about and giving insight into why this is happening, into who these folks are, who can talk about Saudi Arabia, who know the language. I know who they should be tapping. They're not underground. They're at very prestigious universities. I know where they can be. Their stuff is published. It's out there. These folks who were parading across the television were saying some of the most inaccurate and ridiculous things. They never appeared again to apologize or to say, I got it wrong. They were absolutely self-appointed. The production of expertise was absolutely, it was mind-boggling, and it was completely gendered.
But they were invited to parade.
Yes, they were. They were.
But you also need to know that they will call you themselves. So all those people, they invited themselves. I just had this the other day. Now, I have my show, and my producer is a woman, so we don't even really have to go here because we know where I am coming from and where she is coming from. And we had someone call. I am reaching for someone else, a woman, a particular woman expertise, and I won't go into the subject. And we had a call saying, I know you're interviewing or you want to interview so-and-so, but really I am the person that you should talk to. And Kathryn said, with respect, no, that's not who Callie is looking for. But I'm just telling you that this is how it happens. So if you sit back and don't put yourself out there, sometimes you just got to push forward, because people who are booking many times are just grabbing in the moment. They're under a lot of pressure. Who is available? And they say they have 4 stars. Okay, yeah, I looked it up in Google. They do. All right, they must know. That's really what happens. This is, in my opinion, why Juliet Kayyem, who is a security expert for many years, never got any play. And she was right here, and she should have gotten some play because she does know the subject matter. So just again, just saying.
Yes, thank you for your patience.
Not a problem. I hate to cut off the conversation, but as a student, I'm a senior. My name is Shweta. I'd be really curious to know how your participation in the op-ed project, if and how it's changed the way that you teach writing to students and how you evaluate it, considering how you had a new perspective on some of the challenges that learning a new kind of, or relearning a new kind of writing can offer.
That's great. Let's start here and go all the way down. You start.
Well, I'm not teaching at the moment, so it can't actually help my...
But you will.
But I will again. I think that, as for everything here, there's different kind of writing for different kind of audiences. And I think if you're trying to write a paper for a specialized professional journal, you write in a particular way. If you're trying to write for a popular audience, you write in a different kind of way. And I think that's why the Calderwood seminars are so valuable, but they're also very specific. And you would write a thesis differently from how you would write for a newspaper. So I think that I would tell that to students and evaluate it based on what the audience was that they were writing for.
Kathy?
Well, like Adele, I'm not teaching right now, and in fact, I haven't been teaching for the last 5 years, so I'm a little rusty in the classroom. But I think like a lot of chastening experiences in life, being a student, again, always makes you more patient with your students. And I am hoping that when I go back to teach again in the English department, that the Calderwood seminars will still be around, and that I will have written many more op-eds, and that I will be able to, not teach op-eds, but I would like to be able to do more and to be able to teach public writing. So I'm hoping that these experiences will assist me.
I think I'm going to pass on this because I teach statistics.
Roxanne?
No, I don't think that particular op-ed session taught me to teach writing any differently, because it tended to be about, and it may have been just about our session leader, tended to be about a series of rules about what counted as evidence, for example, or, make sure in the subject line that you put this there and stuff like that. So it was, it really wasn't about writing as much as strategies, which were helpful. So, I mean, in terms of practice and what we did for each other, I think it was a really helpful collaborative enterprise, but I didn't find it so much about writing.
Angela?
For me, I would say that the experience of the op-ed project and writing my own op-ed, if anything, it confirmed sort of what I was already trying to do in teaching students to write, and that is the importance of writing concisely, right? And it reminded me that if you can say the same thing in fewer words, it's better, right? And I tell my students that all the time, and this experience like just made it speak so much louder and clearly for me. I think you come across with your message is stronger if you can say it in fewer words and say it as straightforwardly as possible.
So I think we have time for one more question. Well, I'll see if we can. Okay, two more. Great. Don't sit down. Yes.
I'll bet there are a lot of alumni who have great things to say, who could write terrific op-eds, and what about an article in the alumni magazine or somehow communicating this? I know I, for one, am inspired by this, and we could put Wellesley 70 by the byline.
You're right. That's great. That's exactly right. That's a terrific idea. I couldn't be more in agreement that Wellesley alumni could surely add richly to the topics.
Great minds think alike. That was sort of the line of questioning I was going down, which is how can alums support you in this and get the word out, because I'm sure there's no shortage of alumni willing to share their opinion with the world, but it sounds like we'll get an answer for that maybe later. So I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to write these op-eds, because I know that it's just another thing on your plate, but for alums, I just want you to know we are so proud of you. And when we see the byline, and for us that have had you as our professors, we share it, we're like, I learned from that person. It's just such a joy. And for those of us that don't just move back home to Florida, for those of us that don't live in the Northeast, it's particularly nice because Wellesley is not something that necessarily each of our neighbors know about, and to see that in the paper really does wonders. And I think it also gets students interested in Wellesley too. So thanks for taking the time.
Amen, sister. Let's thank these five for the op-eds and the panel. Thank you. Really terrific. I'm so glad you all are doing this work, and I hope all of you will remember that you're making contributions to this debate all the time. If you think you're just doing a Facebook post, remember. Thanks a lot.